So today's speaker is Simon Sadler, who is a professor of architectural and urban history and directs the art history program here at Davis. He's also a chancellor's fellow. Much of his research concentrates on the ideological issues behind modern and contemporary architecture and urbanism. He has written quite a bit about this topic, and in fact, a number of books. One includes Archogram, Architecture Without Architects, which was published in 2005, The Situationist City in 1998, and Non-Plan, Essays on Freedom, Participation, and Change in Modern Architecture and Urbanism. His ongoing research really looks at the radical side of design and architecture and incorporates different globalizing trends, topics such as ecological thinking, and he is published in a number of journals. His talk today is going to be a combination, a hybrid of what he had intended to present on Drop City, as well as some evidence, I guess, locally of activism here in our own community of Davis. He also is on the editorial board of the Journal of Architectural Education, which is a premier academic journal in the field of architecture, and is also on the advisory board of the California edition of the Architects newspaper. So please join me in welcoming Simon Sadler.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I think it is. Can you hear me? So, thanks very much, Michael. And as Michael was saying, this was going to be about Drop City. I can talk to you about Drop City, but what I found out at 10 o'clock this morning was I couldn't find the slides. So, there's a sort of plan B here. And I guess it's something like, is Davis, the city of Davis, a sort of drop city as well? So this is my eccentric contention. Now, we're going to need a projector as well. So I'm going to try and tie the counterculture, and Drop City is kind of the foremost example of countercultural design. And I'm actually going to tie it back to our own beloved little city of Davis. We're still waiting for the slide there. And the title that I came up with like about 20 minutes ago is Holistic Davis, Activism as Conservatism, ? Now, what I'm trying to get at there is that I think there are currents of design and politics in the city of Davis that keep trying to pull Davis together as though it was some large-scale holistic design. And I'm going to argue that this primarily comes from the counterculture, in other words, design activism and political activism in the 1960s, especially in the USA, but I'm going to be asking really whether that activism has resulted in a sort of conservatism, such that, for example, when you visit Davis, you don't necessarily see the hippie town that people think it is. In a sense, then, the activism is, I don't know, underneath the trees, underneath the streets, underneath the fields, and it's that I'm going to try and eke out.
Activism here is to help you out with function F7.
Are we looking for the projector?
Yeah, to toggle the...
Should we end the show and then go and look for the... God, I installed that shortcut. All right, so that's what I was looking for. You know, a bit of eye candy to start with. But, you know, even that co-op. So look, as you move around Davis, you keep finding these little sort of heterotopian places. By heterotopia, I mean these sort of enclaves of an alternative culture. And the co-op is sort of demonstratively that. And then you go out into the parking lot and sometimes you see this guy. I wonder what is happening here. This isn't actually part of the presentation. I'm not actually that advanced in programming PowerPoint. Okay, I think he's settled down now. And so you see this guy going around in this sort of bicycle building, which announces the idea of Davis as somehow connected to counterculture and to design activism, well, look, here's a strange question. What is Davis? And I've been living here sort of 5 or 6 years, and I'm still trying to puzzle this one out. I can't decide whether I like it or not after 6 years. Sometimes I think I start to like it, and I think of this as a sign of weakness in myself. But it is certainly an experiment of sorts, and I think Davis has struggled to reconcile two of the principal features of Californian life. Modernity, there's I-80 going past, as it goes past Davis. So, by living in Davis, you enjoy the benefits of being in the center of really one of the most modern states the world has ever known. And at the same time, Davis is trying to reconcile that with this sort of almost overwrought respect for nature. So it's trying to go forwards and backwards simultaneously. And I think, this has been combined into a current, into an idea of holism in Davis. What I mean by that, then, is an attempt to combine us into this unitary, balanced whole where Davis exists simultaneously with modernity and with nature. Now, if I was to give you a history of that, I think it goes back to the counterculture in the 60s, a countercultural optimism in Davis's outlook. I wonder if this is going to stop doing this. I'm pretending it's not happening. And that's perhaps associated with Davis's predominantly boomer generation, educated, primarily white constituency. So I think, there is a sort of political dimension to it there. So let's do a sort of brief ecotopian, holistic tour of Davis, because if you're not convinced, I will now try and assemble fragments of evidence. What do you think? Should we pause while we try and figure this out? Otherwise, somebody might...
I'm wondering if the display, the high resolution...
Let's pause for a second, I think.
Can you toggle back?
Now I can't see any notes, so I'm going to have to make this up from now on. This could be incredibly surreal. I wonder what this slide was about. I think, from the title, so the idea was that I was going to show you various sites of sort of countercultural interventions around Davis. So I'm trying to assemble evidence here that secretly Davis still thinks of itself as being a design activist center. So, 1967, I think some of the examples that I'm showing here are almost a sort of non-design, that the design is somewhat invisible. But in 1967, you may know that Davis became the first city in America to have modern bike lanes. A modest thing, maybe? How about this? You probably know Baggins End, the domes, still on campus. Sort of doubly countercultural insofar as this was erected by, the experimental college that operates at UC Davis. So it was a building exercise. Look, put like that, the buildings themselves are unusual forms, but it's the manner in which they were made as well, the type of cooperation that was required to assemble these things. This is what I mean by holism, that the design activism that we're seeing in examples like this are of a sort that require team effort and group work. So just building one of these domes brings people together. So you can see how design becomes like a sort of social experiment, a live social experiment. Whether this is particularly good architecture or not, I don't know. Also the idea is that once you're in the dome, now this is sort of serious. In the 1960s, it was believed that living in a dome would change the way you think. That the shape of the space would induce lateral thinking. So there we are inside one of the Baggins End domes. And then you can see as well how the domes become, if you like, seeds that work out into the landscape. And this is something that I think we'll be covering in the slides today, where you see a type of design that is activist in the way that it tries to integrate buildings with landscape. So when you go and see the Baggins End domes, you become immediately aware that the domes are of the landscape is of the domes. So this idea of knitting together into a new whole, into a new unitary system. And then, the domes sit there in the middle of the campus, almost like a sort of irritant, as if really they would like to grow out and out and out and eventually take over the campus. But for the while, they're hemmed in. And you see other sites around Davis that have that sense of potential. For example, Village Homes. You can see really wants to become a model for the whole of Davis, but at the moment is hemmed in. I would go so far as to suggest that Davis wishes to become a model for the whole of America. That at the moment, Davis is sitting out there in the Central Valley surrounded by fields, but it can think of itself as a seed by which to transform America. Now, if we don't think of Davis like that so much anymore, I think it certainly was the case back in the 60s and in the 1970s. Here, let's see, what's this about? Activism, 1972. I think it was in 1972 that students at UC Davis realized they had the vote on the local city. And a guy called Bob Black, I think, organized the student vote, and they took over the city. And this is one of the turning points of Davis politics, away from business interests into sort of new age countercultural interests. Same guy, Bob Black, introduced the bus service and got these London buses over. Again, a sort of non-design, but it starts to slowly transform the landscape, and it presses on local politics and local assumptions. Here's a big one. Low growth, the low growth ordinance of 1973. The reason that Davis doesn't get any bigger is because of an ordinance that strictly controls its growth. So if you want to build anything, you go through years and years and years of applying to get that ordinance moved, that ordinance changed, and you usually end up getting defeated. The last attempt to build anything was what, over there, what's it called? I can't remember. But over there on the northeast corner, and that's been stymied. That low-growth ordinance was really pretty radical in 1973. You may have noticed that the rest of America went towards increasing sprawl. I think it was last year we were in the States losing something like 2,500 acres of farmland every day to sprawl, whereas Davis tries to keep itself as a systematically organized body. It tries not to start to develop middle-age spread. Davis Ordinance of 1975. Now, this has been superseded, of course, by things like LEED standards. But Davis had, I understand, the first energy ordinance in the United States in 1975. So it became a model by which legislators subsequently drafted law about energy conservation. And this was conceived by a small band of activists known as the Davis Low Energy Research Group. Have I convinced you yet that we're a sort of laboratory here for a new sort of suburban living? Here's the big one again, the village homes. I know you're landscape architects, and so you're probably all too aware of village homes. But anyway, it's worth reminding ourselves that although looking completely innocent and conservative, what is driving village homes is, well, a desire to reinvent the suburb. To reinvent the suburb as completely meshed in with nature. Again, if I have time, probably won't, but if I have time, I'll try and get back to some of the ideas operating, the truly activist design, ideas that were spurring on the development of village homes. Look, even on this aerial picture, here's one. You can see that the roads are very narrow. So the whole purpose of this layout was to slow down traffic, to arrest the acceleration of America. And one of the big problems they had was to convince the fire department that this wasn't going to end in tears, with a fire engine trying to drive around these narrow streets. Farmers market, again, it's a sort of non-design, especially the sort of the hall itself. I mean, it's about as basic a piece of design as you can get. Truly sort of background architecture. The idea is, though, that it's a magnet for social interaction, whereby the good people of Davis all meet and greet a couple of days a week. Of course, there have been urban markets in cities for hundreds of years in the States, thousands of years elsewhere. So what's the big deal? It's the fact that this farmers market was one of the first in the new wave of farmers' markets dedicated to supporting organic and sustainable foods. In other words, you know, the sort of stuff that Michael Pollan calls slow food and local food. The farmers' market was part of that development. All right, here's a slightly more off-the-wall idea that Davis tries to develop a culture of splendid isolation by deliberately restricting the exiting and ingress of outsiders. First of all, you probably know about the famous Toad Tunnel over in East Davis. There's a 6-inch pipe where real Davis frogs can come in and go out of the city of Davis without getting squashed. There's even a book about it. Not a very good one. I tried reading it to my son. It takes a very long time to get through it. But and you know Rush Limbaugh. He's back in the news. Allegedly, he was the first person to describe us as the People's Republic of Davis. Quote, they're nuts. Have a look at this. This is the Richards Underpass. Again, a sort of non-design. What's happening here? Why would I be thinking about this as an architectural historian? It's the fact that it's a sort of anti-design, you know, an activism that prevents things happening. This is what I mean about a sort of radical conservatism. Voters of Davis have turned down proposals to widen the Richards Underpass 4 times. That's why there's always a traffic jam there, but the idea is that it will prevent the downtown getting swamped. And the further rationale is that it's very preservationist. That innocent-looking bridge apparently is the last remaining I-beam railroad bridge in use in California. And on that basis, it's being protected. The road itself, as well, is somewhat historic. It's part of the old Lincoln Highway, which was part of early 20th century Western migration in the U.S. I could go on. All right, here's where Davis becomes conscious of its specialness with the launching of the Whole Earth Festival in 1971. And I want to explore that idea of the whole Earth again. You know, it's the holism, the recombination of people and nature into some sort of new co-evolutionary unity, whereby we all work together, we work with nature, we work with design, we work with climate. The background to where these ideas are coming from, this is very, very simplistic, I know, but a few slides to remind one of the ideological mindset in the 1960s and early 1970s. The Vietnam War, of course. You can see Agent Orange being sprayed there. In every regard, the Vietnam War prompted a skepticism of all types of large-scale, high-tech intervention. And one of the reactions then we see in a place like Davis is a desire to scale back. Instead of expanding things, to draw things in. Instead of being violent with nature, using machinery and chemicals to try and make nature our friend. Rachel Carson's enormously influential book at about the same time, in 1968, Silent Spring, warned of she thought, the apocalyptic effects of the use of pesticide, hence the Silent Spring. She was concerned that the continued use of pesticides would put the biosystem out of whack and eventually nothing would grow. That you would slow down the cycle of nature until it became non-existent. Ian McHarg. Now, in terms of a design activism around the idea of a new whole, a new unity, Ian McHarg is a sort of forgotten figure now, or largely forgotten, but was very influential at the time, actually visited UC Davis. Regrettably, he, from what I understand, was drunk again, but launched a stinging critique of the UC Davis campus. McHarg's argument was that design should not subjugate nature. He traced this idea back to the Bible, where he says that Western civilization has been given this idea that nature is our garden, that must be subjugated to our will. And as he put it, nature must become the friend of design. It must be the co-partner. Oh golly, this is actually getting a bit more complicated now. Christopher Alexander, a wildly eccentric but very, very influential design theorist, not only in kind of architecture, but also in computer programming and so forth. Christopher Alexander argued that when you look at big systems, you start to discern patterns that combine and recombine everything, from your body to your house, to your city, to the ecosystem. So again, this is another example of the pressure to look at design as a method of recombining the world into systematic order. Here's probably the most influential of the figures on the idea of holistic design. This is the famous inventor Richard Buckminster Fuller, wildly eccentric. Here he is pictured in the, I'm trying to remember the year, about 1967, 66, I can't quite remember. I haven't got my notes. But this is him at the peak of his fame on the cover of Time magazine. And Fuller was arguing for a truly systematic approach to all design in which we think logically about the limits of technology and how to make technology work in a natural way so that you don't fight forces, you work with forces. The reason that his head has been given this extraordinary treatment here is that the illustrator of Time magazine has turned Mr. Fuller's head into one of his buildings, which is called a geodesic dome. And watch out for the dome. The Baggins end domes aren't geodesic, they're not Fullerene, but they follow Buckminster Fuller's teaching. That domes are good, structurally efficient mechanisms, which are the only logical way of building. This is what he argued. He argued literally that all design, all architecture must be based around the physical, technological efficiency of the dome. The Whole Earth Catalogue launched in 1968. Now this is one of my special sort of pet projects. I'm fascinated by the Whole Earth Catalogue. And this was launched in the Bay Area. I think it had a huge influence on an entire generation of designers. Even those that hated the catalogue were reacting against it. I think largely contemporary architecture now is in part a reaction against the Whole Earth Catalogue, against the idea that architecture and design must always be subject to nature. Sometimes you can see a certain defiance in contemporary architecture where, I don't know, let's say Daniel Libeskind deliberately sort of makes his building stand on one point, as if to say, you know, screw you, Fuller, I'm balancing a building and it's completely against all the laws of nature because this is art. However, many other designers completely imbibed the Whole Earth Catalogue. It told you how to design, where to buy things. It was edited by a very interesting guy called Stuart Brand, and it was really dedicated to Richard Buckminster Fuller. It was an attempt to put Fuller's ideas out into the world. The reason I've got an atomic bomb is because Stuart Brand, the editor of the catalogue, is giving you a choice there in 1968. You either work with Mother Earth, you work together with nature, and give yourselves a future, or you succumb to the logic of the Cold War, which is nihilistic and will end in destruction. A friend of mine who's done a lot of research on Brand says that Brand became completely paranoid about the atomic bomb after he discovered the town that he was growing up in the Midwest, was on a Soviet list of prime targets to annihilate. And this led Stuart Brand to want to do something. Look, we're back in Davis. So enamored were people in Davis with the Whole Earth concept, the concepts of Fuller and Carson and McHarg and so on, that we launched the Whole Earth Festival, which is still going on. This is the poster by the famous psychedelic artist Peter Max for the first Whole Earth Festival here in 1971. Actually, it was run by the art department, which I'm a part of now, organized by a guy called Jose Huelas. So the Whole Earth idea you can see being re-imported back into Davis here in these slides from the 70s. I think they're rather fun. Look, it comes complete, this slide, with a flag of the whole Earth, as if to say, USA, yay, but also whole Earth, no boundaries. A thinking of design and geography as a single unified system. I rather like this picture from 1980. Now, of course, it's great fun, but there is a larger message going on in this exercise, and it's a sort of object lesson in cooperation, because, of course, this circle is only as strong as everybody's cooperation. The moment somebody gets out of the circle, everybody falls down. So it's a very didactic exercise of the sort that was familiar to the counterculture in the 70s, where you'd get people to play games, where they would learn about the value of cooperation and of slowing things down. And I think that's what we're seeing there. Drop City. So there we did sort of get to Drop City. I think Drop City was a tremendous influence as well. We see, don't we, that Baggins End is a sort of mini Drop City. Well, we're not quite sure when it started, but round about 1965, 1966, a group mostly of dropout art students from the University of Kansas bought a few acres of terrible scrubland in a rather desolate part of Colorado known as Trinidad, and they decided to merge art and life. This is, the great project of avant-garde art, so that you live your life as a work of art. Just like with Baggins End, where we saw people coming together to build, the good people of Drop City came together to build these domes. They loved Buckminster Fuller. They wrote to him telling him that they loved him. Fuller sent them some money because they were about to starve to death and were living on out-of-date food from Safeway at the time. And this was the first civilian use of the geodesic dome idea. Previously, Fuller had just been selling it to the military and had been selling it as a swimming pool cover and this sort of thing. This was the first time that amateurs decided to make geodesic domes. The results, predictably, are chaotic because geodesic domes are incredibly difficult to make, and these domes were no less bad than any others that were made. There were lots and lots of domes built in the 60s and 70s, almost all of which were failures. But what a heroic failure. This is great fun. The domes were made of cut-up scrap cars. So you can see that idea of recycling as well. They would go to local scrap yards with a hatchet and cut chunks of metal out and bond them together into these sort of wonky geodesic dome things. There are actually only a couple of them are real geodesic domes. So here's the emergence of art and life. You can see that inside one of the domes, the interior is made of the artist's paintings. So you're completely getting submerged here into a unified art life thing. They even worked together on their paintings at Drop City. They modestly called this the ultimate painting, now sadly lost. And so, but it's kind of a recombination of artists. Thinking about art laterally so that you involve food, cooking, music. It's the hippie thing. What you're seeing here is the hippie movement being invented, finding its code, finding its lifestyles. Okay, so a distant view of Drop City early in its inception there. So look, they actually did quite a good job. I can't tell you how difficult it is to build a geodesic dome. So you can see that they're building a big one over there on the right. And way more interesting is this thing that looks like an outside privy in the middle. This was their attempt to reinvent the geodesic dome as something that they called the zone. And that means it's a dome that you can stretch around any plan. So you can see that they're trying to do a dome there that's long rather than just circular, because by this date, people had realized that living in a round building is actually very hard. Where do you put the walls? Where do you put the furniture? How do you stop the echo? And so on. Oh, golly, this is one of their first attempts. I know, it's not very good, but heroic. This is a second attempt. This is getting better. I actually think this is, I don't know, I have a pet theory that this is an origin of the use of metal in contemporary architecture. Think of the social science and humanities building, the Death Star. You know, there's a certain geometric similarity there. I think I'm the only person who subscribes to this theory. You can see, actually, just across the road, there was like a bar. You know, mostly when Drop City is photographed, it's made to look like it's in isolation. But in fact, there was quite a busy bar over the road of people sort of observing this bizarre experiment in life that was happening over at Drop City. So that's a close-up of a zone. An attempt, look, you know, to sort of be fair to this was an attempt to rethink architecture from core principles. The designer of this thing, a guy called Steve Baer, thought that he could literally reinvent architecture, that everything that you knew about architecture was over. For example, that architecture is built using concrete and wet things, that architecture is heavy, that it's massive, that it's thick. He was trying to build something that was completely structurally efficient and completely efficient within the design economy. In other words, recycled materials. We're inside that zone there. And you can see there's more sort of prototypes of domes and zones hanging around this studio inside. Look, that's quite an interesting shape. Anyway, I know that's not what we're meant to be thinking about, but I do think that these forms are quite interesting. All right, let's move. This last picture of Drop City, this is a passive solar storage unit that they tried to design at Drop City. Data on this is very thin, I suspect because it didn't work. But a great first effort. What they're trying to do here is to extract energy from the sun. So look, it's that whole Earth thing again. It's to think about design in the largest parameters possible. In other words, to think about design in terms of a solar economy. Every calorie we eat, everything that we have really on the Earth comes from a solar economy. It comes from energy supplied free by the sun. And it was this realization, probably literally while dropping acid and playing a guitar, that it all goes back to the sun. You know, really, it was a kind of a transcendental reason that prompts them to build one of these collectors and to see if they can harness the energy from the sun. Look, what if it is a failure? Let's go back to Davis. So this is Steve Baer's name. He was the guy that did the solar collector that invented the Zome. Baer was a consultant on that first Davis energy ordinance. The activists here had heard about Baer's work out in Trinidad in Colorado at Drop City, where, by the way, was also the first place that the Whole Earth catalog was sold. And Baer was invited to consult on an energy ordinance for Davis. Look, I mean, why not? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say then that Davis is kind of the respectable version of Drop City, at least at this point. It's trying to take those lessons about communal living and energy conservation and respect for nature and so on, and art, and fold it into a real town. This is Steve Baer's own house, using what he called drum walls. So he lived in the desert in New Mexico on the outskirts of Albuquerque. And during the day, he'd open the doors over the windows, and the sun would heat up the oil, the cans that are full of water. And then at night, they'd close those doors, and the drums would radiate heat back into the house to get them through the cold desert nights. And this led to, you know, an amazing reduction in their energy bills. Of course, as well, it kind of reinvents architecture as well. I mean, does that even look like a house? I love this house. And it comes complete with a windmill as well to get further energy for nothing out of nature without expending fossil fuel. There's Baer inside his house in the early 70s. There we are on the other side of the drum wall. And you can see the scene, and you can see this is a Zome. So it's like, again, a sort of real-life version of Drop City. But when you get back to Davis, no more Zomes. But we do have, around village homes, examples of drum walls. I'm trying to remember the name of, because I haven't got my notes, Jonathan Hammond. Jonathan Hammond. He's an architect still in downtown Davis, and he's the guy who tried to apply Steve Baer's crazy drum wall idea to a real suburban house, as you can see here, in village homes. Otherwise, it's a more or less conventional house. You go around the other side. It's lovely, isn't it? As it faces the path, it's trying to be just sort of respectable, middle class, trim the roses, and you go around the back, and there is this declaration of independence from consumer America. Let's go inside as well. I have to say, it's a somewhat intrusive element in the living room, but I love it. And they do work, apparently. The lady who owns this one alleges, though, that she can feel the climate of Davis increasing year upon year as this thing loses efficiency, and she's getting hotter and hotter. I don't know. But these things, these are culvert pipes that used to be, that would be used for irrigation under the fields around here, and Hammond figured out how to seal them, fill them with water, and to create a Baer-type drum wall. More extreme, again, at village homes is a complete berm home. So in other words, here we sink truly into nature, and we use turf not only to insulate the house, but to merge back into nature. And that's really the larger lesson of village homes, which was, as well as being low energy by the use of solar panels, passive solar devices, is also an attempt to merge with nature and to create a new sense of community around common areas. Do we need to wrap up for time? Yep. So I think we'll have to leave it there. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Entertaining lecture despite the technological and lighting challenges we've had today. I guess it has to do with Friday the 13th. But if you have any questions for Simon, perhaps he could spend some time in the hallway after the class to answer some questions that you may have. He also teaches in art history, so I don't know if you teach courses on a regular basis for undergraduates, but so look him up in the catalog for subsequent courses.